Dagda agus tá fáilte romh. Is mis an scéala beag, and welcome back to Bardic Lore. Today I'd like to take a quick look at the idea of Tir na Nog. Is it the land of eternal youth, or is it more of an allegory for loss? If you're interested, stick around. Dagda and welcome back. It's mis an scéala beag. I'm the little storyteller. Today, in our Bardic Lore series, we're on to episode 3, and I wanted to explore the idea of Tir na Nog. It's very, very common in the stories. Well, actually, it's not as common in the stories as you'd think, but it's very well known as part of Irish folklore all around the world. And I thought I'd take a quick look at that today. So, Tir na Nog, is it the land of eternal youth, or is it more of an allegory for loss? Let's kind of dive in and have an exploration. So, as ever, just a little bit about myself. I'm a writer and a storyteller, a presenter and events host, and I'm a tour guide on the land of Ireland as I take people around and explore the landscape and how that connects us in with the stories of our past and our folklore, which kind of informs our reality where we are today. If you've seen episode 1 or episode 2, you'll have an idea that, for me, story really does inform our perspectives on reality and sometimes even define reality. If you haven't seen them yet, check them out in the links, pop back and have a quick look. But for today, we're going forward and we're going to talk about one of the very well-known locations from our Irish lore. So is it the land of eternal youth or an allegory for loss? What I'm going to touch on is, what is Tir na Nog as defined in the stories? Where is it actually mentioned? So how can you actually see where it turns up in our resources from the root lore? And then also just a bit of a discussion from my own personal perspective about, is it a paradise or is it more of a purgatory? So what is Tir na Nog? Tir na Nog is Gaeilge, so it's Irish. And the words stand for Tir is land, and then Na is of, and then Og is youth. So when you put them all together, you get the land of youth, and that's where the land of eternal youth comes from. It's mentioned in the stories as being a place off out the west of Ireland. Now, before we had an understanding of our globe, before we had an understanding of the world around us, Ireland was the edge of existence for a lot of people's understanding. Even as far as the Roman Empire and how great that they expanded all across Europe and, Russia all the way down around the Mediterranean, everywhere into Africa. Ireland was like a bridge too far, actually. They referred to it as Hibernia, the land of eternal winter. But there was nothing out beyond Ireland as far as they knew. All of the old maps, really, before the discovery shall we say, of America, as far as everyone understood, there was nothing out west of Ireland. And that's where a lot of the stories kind of come from. So the culture that developed in Ireland, our early folklore, is very much based on an island mentality. So you have to be seafaring. You have to kind of travel across the waves in order to kind of get anywhere, even to our next nearest neighbor. Like the stories of, say, St. Patrick swimming over the channel to get away from Wales where he was a slave, because he's not even Irish, but that's a story for a different day. But really, anywhere beyond a stroll, anywhere outside of the land of Ireland itself, you had to be seafaring. You had to be on the boats. And then, even then, the understanding of kind of nautical travel may have been very limited at that point. It does say that the two of the Danann arrived into Ireland from skyships. So whether or not they had, spaceships, is it aliens? Or is it actually, they had a greater knowledge of travel to be able to navigate away from land? So where we find mentions of Tir na Nog, specifically this land outside of Ireland, is in some of the earlier stories, and they're known as the Octree, which is the early kind of oral teaching tales that were passed down. And if you remember in episode 2, I talked about bards and how bards are so closely linked with druids in the remembering, the recollection, the carrying forward of knowledge and information down the lineage into the next generation, because there wasn't script back in those days. So these stories come to us, they're known as Octree, and it's these kind of teaching tales, and everything had, the moral of the story, the learning point of the story. So where we find mention of Tir na Nog is in a couple of places. The main big story is in the Fenian cycle. So coming from the books of Leinster and the Book of Fermoy, that kind of stuff. So we're talking 9th century texts. Well, 11th century texts copied from possibly original or older 9th century information written down by those monks, as I mentioned before in previous episodes. So it's that kind of information around Tir na Nog that's carried forward down the way. So this land of eternal youth, how it kind of features in the story of Oisín and Tir na Nog, which is one of the folk tales that I learned when I was in school as a young school kid in Ireland. I won't read. Well, let's kind of just retell you some of the story in my view of it, my verbs of it. So in the Fenian cycle, it's all based around this particular hero, one of the great heroes of Ireland, which I'll probably do an episode on him. So it's Fionn, son of Cúil, or Fionn mac Cúil. So Fionn is this great warrior, this great chieftain and poet, kind of tipping all the boxes on the hero feats. And he leads this war band known as the Fianna. So Fionn grows up, has his life, has like his wives and stuff, and one of his sons is named Oisín. And Oisín is kind of like the spits of his dad. Like he's exactly kind of Fionn made young almost, even down to the impetuousness, even down to his passion and his curiosity. And Oisín is a very, very passionate person. He's running around all over the place and he wants to kind of prove himself to his dad. So he's working at the warrior feats, he's working at traveling around. And in all of his travels, he comes across a fair maiden, so it says, and he becomes infatuated with her. And it's this kind of golden-haired, beautiful woman riding this impressive white horse. So it's this big, mad white horse. And he's pleads to her. He's like chasing after her because she's riding away. And he's like, tell me your name, please tell me your name. And eventually, like, he kind of follows her and pursues her to the point where she gives, and she's like, okay, well, I can tell you my name. And as much as I like you and I'm interested in you, there's nothing I can do. My name is Niamh, and I'm the daughter of Manannán and MacLír. So Manannán is kind of the god of the sea, Lír being the sea. So she identifies herself as Niamh, daughter of this god, and that she comes from a place called Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth. So Oisín, completely smitten with her, is like, I'll go with you. I'll forsake all of this. I'll give up my land. I'll give up all of this kind of stuff. I want to go with you. I want to be with you. And she's like, it's not really a good idea, but he insists because he's totally smitten with her. And she's like, okay, well, if you do, you can't come back. And he's like, yep, Grant, I'm in, no problem. And so she lifts him up onto this white horse and they ride off out of Ireland into the west. And so they leave across the waves and they arrive in the land of eternal youth. And what it says is that it is this abundant, glorious, beautiful landscape. It's this amazing kind of verdant fields and abundant lifestyle, and everyone is young and everyone's having a great time, and it's drinking and it's feasting and it's revels. And Oisín is like completely smitten within this, and he's absolutely committed to being there. But again, these stories, these octroi, always have a teaching element, and not all of them end very happily. So Oisín spends about a year, as far as I know, in Tir na Nog with Niamh, and he's very, very delighted and very, very happy. But over time, he begins to wonder, he begins to worry. What's it like? I left my family, I left my dad, I left like everyone, I left it all behind. What has happened? And so he begins to get this homesickness, so that it actually begins to manifest as an illness in him. And Niamh is like, you need to let it go. You need to kind of it's grand. Listen, you will never die here. You will never grow old here. Let's just stay and be happy and be bountiful and beautiful and all the rest. But he still begins to sicken. And she's like, okay, well, in order to save him, because she is in love with him, in order to save him, she's like, okay, there is a way for you to see Ireland again. You must get on the horse, you must ride the horse, and you must not get off the horse. Okay? You can travel back over the waves, travel on this white horse back into Ireland, but you must not get off the horse. And she insists with him and she pleads with him, go, it will help you, but do not get off the horse. And so Oisín is delighted with this. He's full of vigor again. He's full of like, yes, I get to go back. I get to see Ireland. And he takes the horse and she's, last word, don't you get off that horse. And he's like, of course, I swear I will not get off the horse. And so he rides back across the waves, and as he comes across the waves, he sees Ireland, he sees the land again, and straight away his spirits are lifted, and he's full of like hope and joy. And he kind of rides up the waves onto the land itself, and he begins to ride around looking for his people. Like he's only gone a short while as far as he's concerned. But everything seems strange. Ireland seems strange. Where once there was kind of forests as far as he could see, now there's fields. And the fields are all walled and structured and laid out, you know. And he's riding around and he's trying to get an idea of the landscape. He's trying to get an idea of what part of Ireland he's in. And eventually he sees a man in a field, kind of digging and plowing the field, and there's a big boulder in the middle of the field. And the guy's putting wedges under. He's trying to get this boulder out of his field. And Oisín rides up on the horse and he's like, excuse me, hey, can you tell me where I am, please? And the farmer in his field is like, sees this big, huge, beautiful white stallion, sees this, kind of ethereal, like looking character, this broad, beautiful warrior wearing ancient kind of clothing. And he's like, yeah, you're in Ireland, you're in Connacht in Ireland. And Oisín is like, okay, well, can you tell me, like, what's happened? Like, where's all the trees and stuff? And the farmer's like, I don't know what you're on about. I've farmed this field for all of my lifetime, and my father farmed it, and his father farmed it. There hasn't been trees here for like generations, And Oisín is a little bit confused by this, and he's beginning to feel a little bit unsettled. And the farmer's looking at this big, muscled kind of warrior, like noble-looking guy, and he's like, listen, can you actually give me a hand? I've got this rock in my field, and I need to get it out of my field. Otherwise I can't grow as much as I need to for my growing family. And Oisín is like, yeah, okay, fair enough, but I can't get off the horse. And the farmer's like, well, that's a little bit odd. And he's like, no, it's grand. I can do this. I'll just lean over and, pick up the rock. And so the farmer's like, okay, have at it. And so Oisín kind of rides up, leans right the way over, and kind of gets his arm in under the rock. And he begins to push and begins to lift, and the rock begins to move, and then snap. The harness of the saddle, the strap of the saddle underneath the horse breaks. And when it tumbles, the rock settles down, Oisín slips off and lands on the ground of Ireland. So he is dismounted from the horse. And it's said in the story that all of the years that he had missed arrive in upon him all at once. And the farmer, remember, like the story that we have had down the way comes from this farmer who saw this beautiful, young, vigorous man wither and age and become frail until he turns to dust. And then the horse leaves, rides back across the waves into Tir na Nog, and it's said there that Niamh kind of was Niamh of the woes from then on. Like, she was completely heartbroken, and even though she was living forever, she was without the person she loved. So there's a lot of stories in this Octree and these Imram, these ancient kind of tales. And there's another section which mentions something similar, the voyages of Bran. And that's, I think it's older, not quite sure. I think it's older again than the Fenian cycle. And in this one, Bran, this young kind of warrior, travels off across the waves of his warband, and he actually rows around all these different islands out there. And it's very much reminiscent of the Trials of Odysseus, in the same kind of parallel, in that they're lost amongst all these kind of islands. And Bran and his warriors, they pass by an island in their adventures where everyone is young and beautiful and all the rest of it. So it's not mentioned exactly as Tir na Nog, but it's kind of nodded that is the island where everyone is young and no one dies. And in the same way, when Bran and his rowers eventually make it back to Ireland, one guy can't contain himself and he leaps off the boat onto Ireland because he's missed it so much, and he turns to dust straight away. So there's this idea that when you step across into the other world, when you step outside of reality, you're stepping outside of time, but time still has some hook on you, still has some hold on you. So as long as you're traveling the other world, time doesn't impact, but the moment you come back, time arrives and the bill comes due, as they say. So we've got these mentions of Tir na Nog. Oh yeah, there's also Octree Conla, which is another story from the Leinster cycle as well, the Fenian cycle in Leinster, where one of the young kind of sons of the king is exactly the same as Oisín, falls in love with a fair maid, she falls in love with him, and he's taken away to Tir na Og. And it's actually just mentioned as a footnote because it's Conla and Art. They're these two brothers. And it just says that a fae woman, a she woman, fell in love with Conla and took him away. And he was in the land of Tir na Og after that. Art eventually grows up and he becomes known as Art the Lonely, the Lonesome, the Lonely One, because he doesn't have his brother anymore. But Art eventually, following his lineage, following everything he can, becomes King of Ireland. And then from him, Cormac MacArt, one of the other very famous kings of Ireland, is that lineage down the way. So essentially, Cormac MacArt's uncle is also said to have gone across the waves into Tir na Og and is never seen and heard from again. And this is where things begin to, from a storytelling point of view, and that's what I'm all about. It's understanding what is the impact of stories, where do they come from, what perspectives do they give us, and how they inform our reality. So this idea, this conceit, this like imagining of this land where no one grows old, where no one gets sick, where everyone kind of has food and like plenty and joy, it's a lovely and inspiring circumstance to imagine. And when we kind of compare stories and timelines, and we're dealing with early kind of Neolithic farming era for a lot of this archaeology and a lot of these kind of stories that kind of connect on down the way. It is 9th century texts to our knowledge written down by these monks, but these oral traditions go way, way back further than that. And so as we begin to tease out, what's the purpose of telling someone a story like that? Is it to make them believe in paradise, in this life after death, or this life beyond, or this fantastical circumstance? Or is it to give them some way to deal with grief? Some kind of allegory to deal with loss. Someone is gone, or they went out across the waves. There's reference in older stories around the Tuatha Dé Danann being able to cast a barrier of the 9th wave. And when the Sons of Mill come to invade Ireland, they can't get past the 9th wave. So is it that kind of so many people in this early kind of fishing and the early kind of boat life of this Ireland and Ireland existence, having to travel on the sea, having to need to be out on the water, and then being lost at sea, boats never coming back, or people falling amongst the waves? Is it the 9th wave claiming them? Did they end up in this land of eternal youth? So that is a very interesting idea for me when I look at the idea of Tir na Og. Is it more of an allegory for loss? Is it more of a way to help someone through a story to imagine that it's not all bad, that there is a place to be? But when we look at the actual stories, especially with Oisín, he goes to this paradise. He's away in paradise. But then there's something else. There's something more. There's the draw of Ireland. There's his existence, his connection to family, his connection to the land around him, reality, which pulls him back. So he is pulled by this need to be real out of this otherworldly dream state. But then the impact to him when he returns to the island, finding it lost, finding it all gone, and then time catching up with him, and the element of him turning to dust by that. Is it possible to look at Tir na Og in a different light? When we kind of consider the impact of that element of it, sure, you can go off and have a great time. It'll be grand. You'll never grow old. You'll have all the ceilidhs, all the dancing and all the stuff that you want, but that's all there is. There's no opportunity to grow. There's no opportunity to change. There's no kind of new life that can be brought forward. There's no kind of new challenges, And so for me, in my perspectives of things, the reason why we connect so strongly to stories of heroes, of adventures, is because of that challenge. It's that kind of moment in any story, in any movie. They could fail. It could go wrong. They could lose, but then they don't. But if you don't have that potential for failure, if you don't have that risk, that moment, that at the extent of, even in any way, the odds of it not going right, does that really allow for the beauty and the scope and the broadness of our existence and the full color and the full range and the full passion? If you can never fail, ever, why should you try? So you can always go for experience. You can always kind of push yourself. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to have a crack, or I just want to feel what this is, or I want to taste this, but there's no risk. There's no inherent gamble involved. As my partner would say, sometimes rated beverage tastes better than purchased beverage, and that's usually beverages off my side of the table. But it's that kind of idea that there's a little element of risk that make things a little bit sweeter. So the idea that this land of eternal youth, to me, it almost seems like a hell in some way, because there's no need to try. There's no need to struggle. There's no need to grow. There's no need to evolve or change. You don't have to better yourself in any way, shape, and form. You just exist forever. So I put it on the note there, Tir na Nog, is it a paradise? Or is it some kind of hellish purgatory? Maybe that's for you to decide based on your perceptions. For me, as an Irish person, looking at that through our Irish lore and our Irish stories, there's a lot of content out there around Tir na Nog and other people's impressions of Tir na Nog. And I've come across a few, and I have to say I find it problematic. Would probably be a gentle way of saying it. It is a land of the She. It is an otherworldly state. It is a place of danger, for someone who's on this spiritual travel. Bran rowing around the other world comes across a lot of dangers in all of these so-called amazingly fantastic islands. Oisín travels out, he comes back, but the danger is inherently there because he loses himself to looking over the horizon, imagining something better and wanting something different, but then not appreciating where he is, not appreciating his existence in the life that he is in. And it's the loss of that, it's the love of that eventually pulls him back and leads to his doom. So it's the idea that you need to value where you are. So from my view, my personal perspective on the Oisín story, it's less about this fantastical great place where everyone lives forever. Maybe that's, again, the allegory for loss and dealing with loss, but also more about love where you are, appreciate where you are when you're there, because when you don't have it, you'll miss it. One other reference I'd like to make to Tir na Nog, and it's a more modern day reference, and it's one that I really, really enjoy and I would recommend. It's a movie. So it's a movie that was released, I think it was in the 90s, when I was a wee kid, and it's called Into the West. Now, it's an Irish movie filmed in Dublin and around Ireland, actually, not just in Dublin. But it follows the story of two young boys of the traveller community in Ireland. Okay, and they're kind of like our own indigenous peoples. But they find this beautiful, amazing white horse. And they're really kind of connected to this horse. And it's like, it's great, it's fantastic. Now, I grew up in North City, North Inner Dublin, suburbs of North Dublin. And, there were we called urban cowboys. It's young guys who had horses and rode horses all around the place. And it was a lifestyle, it was a culture, it's what they did, and it was fantastic. So the movie kind of really sung to me in that way. But these two young guys of the traveller community, find this white horse, and they know their folklore, they know their stories, and so they call the horse Tir na Nog. And the backstory of it, I don't want to go spoiling it too much for anyone who wants to move it, or even do. I would recommend. It's got some really great cast: Colin Meaney, Gabriel Byrne. I can't remember the other person's name. There's a lot of really, really good quality Irish actors in it. But these two young lads take the horse and they're trying to escape. They're riding around trying to be free in a world that's trying to define them. It's a world that's trying to control them. And it's almost like a parallel to how Ireland at the time was trying to control and kind of restrict the traveling community within our country. And, I'd say it is still relevant and valid even today, and I would definitely recommend you watch. But there's a part where the kids are with this horse, and the horse seems to be able to pull off all these fantastic feats. It's amazingly fast. It can jump really high. It can jump really far. As it comes towards the latter parts of the story, things don't seem to be going well with the horse and their reaction in relationship to the horse. And there's an element of fear that comes into it when the boys realize that maybe the horse is going to take them away, horse is going to take them to Tiernan Og, and it's no longer something that they want, this kind of freedom, this joy. It's actually something that causes them fear. And looking for newer kind of views or perspectives on older kind of stories, and a culture that's so inherently connected to this idea and this kind of feeling of story and folklore. It's so hugely important to me, as you can probably tell, but a lot of people I know and my culture, my society. So to have that representation in film is really, really good. And it's that idea that like your folklore and you're aware of like your ancient stories and your heritage and where it all comes from, but there's also that respect of it. There's also that kind of like little bit of fear that like, well, maybe I don't want to be taken away. Maybe I can appreciate where I am. I don't have to flee. I don't have to run away. I can be free with my family where I am within my land. So I would recommend that movie. It's called Into the West. I might find a link for it and put it in the description down below. I'd like to thank you for joining me for this episode 3 in Bardic Lore. If you haven't done the like, subscribe, the connection, hit the bell notifications. These are coming out as and when I do them, whenever the stories kind of come up. My passion, I am trying to schedule it a little bit more, but if you don't want to miss out on an episode, please make sure you hit the bell. Gurav Mila Mahagat, thank you very much. Agus, Slán go fóill. Goodbye for now.